Zelensky following the Ukrainian drone attack against Russia. We're going to go through yesterday's peace talks and whether Operation Spiderweb impacted those negotiations. Also ahead, we'll have the latest from Capitol Hill, where Republican senators are starting to hash out their differences on President Trump's sweeping tax and spending bill. Plus, it appears there are consequences for cutting deals with President Trump, as law firms that appeased the president are now losing some high-profile clients. And a concerning headline out of Washington. The acting head of FEMA telling staff he wasn't aware the United States has a hurricane season. We'll show you.
I said he was joking.
How the Trump administration is responding. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, June 3rd. So good to have you all. Despite DOJ's vow to make the federal government more efficient, a new Washington Post report reveals the department's new procedures and requirements are doing just the opposite. According to interviews conducted by the Post, federal staffers throughout the government are being hit with new layers of red tape, and employees say they are spending hours justifying the most basic purchases. At NASA, for example, employees tell the Post they recently wrote several detailed paragraphs across multiple rounds of emails to win approval to buy simple fastening bolts. And at the Food and Drug Administration, once routine tests on food were delayed because of a requirement to get department-level approval for expenses like lab supplies. Employees say the new rules mandating a review and approval by political appointees are leading to thousands of contracts and projects being held up for months, and large-scale firings spearheaded by DOJ have cut support offices that assisted federal workers with issues ranging from glitching computers to broken desk chairs.
I've got to tell you, Willie, it's actually a scene out of a comedy, except, of course, the consequences are very real. They're very significant. But again, this is what happens when you go in to a government organization thinking you can wield a chainsaw and change things in 2, 3, 4 weeks. And again, the result, again, not a great deal of cost savings. In fact, many people believe the consequences of the cuts will end up costing more than the proposed cuts themselves, the ones that are actually real. But in this case, who would believe it? DOJ creates a new layer of bureaucracy.
Yeah, the whole idea here was to streamline the bureaucracy, to make government more nimble, to make it like a startup, like a Silicon Valley company. Instead, these stories that are coming out one after another are of a government and a bureaucracy mired in wastes of time, like trying to find out if you're holding an event at the State Department, if one of the vendors, the caterer or something, supports DEI, so you can't just get those things done. All these little pinpricks that slow down the government that Mika just laid out, to go along with the big stuff, like eliminating tons of jobs at the VA, or the things that affect our veterans or our healthcare system, all of those. And as you say, Joe, don't add up to the promised big savings, because as we've said a million times, and people are probably sick of us saying it, the big savings are in places where DOJ and Elon Musk are not looking.
Let's bring it right now. NBC News national affairs analyst and partner-in-chief political columnist at Puck, John Heilemann. John, these are all things that we all predicted before. When Donald Trump, reportedly turns and says, was this all just BS, the saving of $1 trillion? Yes, it was. Yes, it was BS. We told everybody it was BS. So I said time and again when they said, they may save up to $2 trillion. That's what I heard in December. Then said they may save up to $1 trillion. And I kept saying, no, maybe you'll find $100 billion. Maybe you'll find $150 billion. You're not going to find $2 trillion. There's not $2 trillion there. You're not going to find $1 trillion. There's not $1 trillion there. Instead, what they do is they do all these random cuts that end up hurting so many people. And I'm not talking about the federal employees who, yes, they're Americans too, many of whom have dedicated their entire life to being public servants, thrown out for random reasons. but they actually end up hurting the constituents that they're supposed to be representing. And here we find now that after Elon Musk leaves, you've got a bureaucracy that's even less efficient because of the new bureaucratic snafus that he's laid out there for a reduced workforce.
Yes, all true, Joe, and you know, you could play the tape back and hear everyone on this show, led by you and with Willie and Mika and me all chiming in saying, you know, this is all unrealistic. But I think, you know, if you haven't even added in yet the costs of all the legal stuff that's gone on around this, you know, what all of the court challenges, all of the things that were halted that had to be restarted, all of the various critical agencies that got shut down or where people got fired, then they had to be cost of firing and then rehiring people who work for the Nuclear Regulatory Agency and stuff like that. I think when the whole thing is said and done, it's going to net out not only that the savings have been minuscule. In fact, they're not going to be savings. They're in fact going to end up having cost the taxpayer a ton of money, having gone through this exercise. But the most interesting thing is the thing you said about Donald Trump. Because all I'm focused on now is what happens between now and next November. There is no doubt that Elon Musk and Doge are going to be at the center of the Democratic attempts to retake the House. Are Elon Musk and Donald Trump going to stay together, or are we seeing the signs of an increasingly growing split? That question, was he always just full of BS? That's the first stage of not just a separation, but a divorce, I think, between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And when these two turn on each other, God knows what's going to happen to the politics for the Republican Party.
Yeah, we'll be following this. It's hard to see exactly what Elon Musk did in terms of efficiency and waste, rather than just come to Washington and hurt a lot of people around the world in the United States and then leave.
It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. There are rules, and people think that, you know, there's a column this morning talking about, I think it's in the Wall Street Journal, the rule of physics, the rule of economics. There are rules, and there are rules in Washington. There's a way to do things. There's a way not to do things. And if you do things wrong and you think you can change 240 years of history, of tradition, of the way Washington works, in a blink of an eye, you're going to do things that end up making the situation even worse. That's exactly what happened. And again, anybody that's been around for more than 5 minutes could have told you that. That's what's so frustrating here. Again, they're sitting here. How in the world can somebody as smart as Elon Musk come to Washington, D.C., look at the budget with all the people around and say, hey, I'm going to cut $2 trillion. Just go on to AI, ask, hey, can you cut $2 trillion from these agencies? No. You'd be laughed like off your phone by ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous they ever thought this was going to happen. So they ended up not saving money, not substantially at all. And again, creating another layer of bureaucracy and inefficiency, the last thing government needed.
Yeah. All right, we're going to revisit this, but moving on now, the Supreme Court has declined to hear a major Second Amendment challenge to a Maryland law that bans assault-style weapons. The move, over the objections of conservative justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Clarence Thomas, means the state's ban will stand. According to New York Times, in a 10-5 ruling in August, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in Richmond, Virginia, said the Maryland law satisfied a history-based test, which was set out in the Supreme Court's 2022 ruling, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. The law's ban on what critics call assault weapons ban did not violate the Second Amendment because rapid-firing long guns are military-style weapons designed for sustained combat operations that are ill-suited and disproportionate to the need for self-defense, wrote Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson, who was appointed by President Ronald Reagan. We declined to wield the Constitution to declare that military-style armaments, which have become primary instruments in mass killings and terrorist attacks in the United States, are beyond the reach of our nation's democratic processes, Judge Wilkinson added. The Supreme Court's decision holds off on the Second Amendment challenge for now, but Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who could become the fourth justice to accept a similar case, said he believes the courts will rule on this issue, quote, in the next term or two.
We'll see. You know, this Maryland law was passed after Sandy Hook.
Right.
And, you know, you have people going around basically saying the Second Amendment is what I say the Second Amendment is. No, the Second Amendment is what the Second Amendment says it is, as interpreted by the Supreme Court. Yeah. And time again, whether you look at the Connecticut law that was passed after Sandy Hook, whether you look at this Maryland law, if you look at other laws that in states ban military-style weapons, the Supreme Court's decided time and again not to take those cases, allowing those state laws to remain intact, and suggesting, Willie, not suggesting, actually saying that what Harvey Wilkinson said, we are not going to keep military-style weapons beyond the reach of the democratic process. We are not going to allow the courts to be held in front of the voters. If the people of Maryland want to ban AR-15s, they have that right. If the people of Alabama don't, they have that right. And that's the way it's always been. So when somebody says, I have a constitutional right for this, you know what? Check and see what the Supreme Court's done, because if the Supreme Court hasn't protected it and hasn't held it under the Second Amendment, it's not a Second Amendment right as defined by the Constitution. And that's what Judge Wilkinson said last night.
Yeah, Judge Wilkinson saying basically that these are military-style weapons, and they also, this law banned magazines more than 10 rounds, saying you don't need that gun and multiple rounds beyond 10 to defend yourself. This is not a question of self-defense, argued that judge. This is not a question of the Second Amendment. We heard from Justice Kavanaugh, who said we want the lower courts to hash this out a little more. It'll probably come back to us down the road. On the other hand, Justice Thomas saying the Supreme Court needs to step in and answer this question about whether law-abiding citizens can own a semi-automatic rifle under the Second Amendment. So we'll see how that plays out. Another story this morning, at least 11 big companies no longer are working with law.
Các bạn đã quay trở lại với kênh Tô Màu của mình. Hôm nay thì mình sẽ dẫn các bạn tô màu một bức tranh về hai bạn nhỏ đang ngồi bánh trưng nha. Ở đây thì những bánh trưng được sắp xếp gọn gàng vào trong nồi và các bạn đang đốt lửa đun nồi bánh trưng này. Ở đây thì mình sẽ các bạn nữ, tóc mình sẽ tô màu nâu. Chiếc áo thì mình sẽ tô màu hồng. Tiếp theo thì mình sẽ tô chiếc quần nha. Chiếc nón thì mình sẽ tô màu vàng. Tiếp theo thì mình sẽ tô màu tiếp bạn nam. Và tóc của bạn nam mình sẽ tô màu nâu. Theo sẽ tô chiếc nón. Chiếc áo thì mình sẽ tô màu xanh. Còn mình sẽ tô màu xanh biển nha. Chiếc áo thì mình sẽ lựa chọn tô màu cam. Đôi dép thì mình sẽ tô màu vàng. Cái này đôi dép mình sẽ tô màu xanh. Mình sẽ tô chiếc ghế. Tiếp theo thì mình sẽ tô màu ở đây thì củi nha. Củi để đốt mình sẽ lựa chọn tô màu nâu. Rồi, những chiếc bánh trưng thì mình sẽ tô màu xanh. Rồi, tiếp theo mình sẽ tô màu ngọn lửa. Nồi mình sẽ tô màu xám. Vậy là mình đã tô màu và hoàn thiện xong bức tranh về hai bạn nhỏ đang ngồi canh nồi bánh chưng. Thì các bạn có thể tham khảo qua cách tô màu này của mình. Video tô màu đến đây cũng hết. Hẹn gặp lại tất cả các bạn ở các video tô màu tiếp theo nha.